Hi, my name is Cassandra Lambert. I'm here to share my story of becoming my own hero and going through childhood trauma, specifically sexual abuse from age 5 to 8. So my mom was arguing with her boyfriend, and I don't know what they were arguing about. I was only 2. And when I revisit this memory, there's no sound, but they were arguing about something, and I went over there, and I don't remember what happened next. The part of this memory that I remember is just because of what other people have told me. But I guess my mom moved me out of the way and I hit my eye on the corner of a coffee table and got a black eye. This man's mom didn't particularly like my mom, so she called CPS and I was taken away. So I would say 3 to 6 months it took my mom to get me back. I got back with my mom and then we moved into a house with like all her friends. So it was a house full of women and we had a room that we shared. And it's funny because the babysitter was like their abuela and she only spoke Spanish, and we were watching, Spanish soap operas. And I guess I picked up the language at that age because, you just pick up stuff when you're so young. And so being in that house was actually great and safe and cozy because it was a bunch of women. And I was actually a little adventurous at that part of time. Like I decided one day I'm going to go shopping for Barbies. So I took my purse and my change and just walked out back to a really busy street and to a bus stop. And I got in a lot of trouble for that. So I guess at that point, the trauma from being in foster care didn't disrupt, my soul to the, I was still very adventurous, It was when we were in this house that my mom met Bobby, and she met him actually through the roommates, her friends that we lived with. So 3 to 4-ish, she started to date him, and then we moved in definitely by the time I was 4, before I was 4 even, because I have my preschool picture, which is what I sent you, the one that's all I'm happy and colorful. So we were already living with him when I was 4. So I'm assuming they started dating before. He treated us like princesses. He showed up and he was always giving us gifts, really beautiful gifts, taking us to beautiful places, fancy places, restaurants and things. Now that I'm older, I can understand the type of personality is more than I would have then, but he completely fits narcissist, because the love bombing, the elaborate gifts. He was this business guy. He would take me with him to business meetings, and he was my first father figure, right? Because my mom was a single mom, and we moved into this really huge house with him in San Francisco. It was 3 stories, so it was so cool for me. I'm oh wow, we went from this tiny little bedroom to this huge house. I got to have my own room. I was in a waterbed. The thing that is interesting is I did start to have nightmares, and I also started to see these dark beings around my bed, and I wonder if part of me was picking up on a darker energy. It wasn't at the beginning when we first were with him, but closer to before he lost his job, I was starting to see this darkness around that was scaring me. I started to get scared at night. I would have to have a light on. Another thing though that does come up is after the foster care, I would wet the bed sometimes. So something about that, I would wet the bed. Honestly, there was a point where I thought him and my mom were going to have a baby. And my mom was really excited actually. And so was I. I was ooh, I get to have a sibling. And then the baby never came. However, he didn't become a monster to me until we had to move into this tiny rundown apartment in San Bruno, and he lost his job. He became a monster to me because they started fighting and arguing. I hadn't heard them do that before, and I looked out the room and saw him kick my mom. She was pregnant with my sister by this time, in the stomach with her pregnant baby belly, and she went flying across the room to our wicker chair. I don't know what happened after that because I was I can't believe I just saw that right shot. But I heard my mom crying in the bathroom, and it was the first time I had heard her crying ever. So I had went in there and just sat with her. And even this memory is so interesting because I can't forget it. I can't unsee it. And my mom just can't remember it because you know how trauma works, right? So he ended up losing his job. And we moved from this big 3-story house that was amazing to this tiny shack-like apartment on San Bruno Ave by the airport. And he was not the same person. Can't get it out of my head because it was the first time, like, it's the first time I even recall them like fighting or yelling or anything like that. Like, I feel like they kept any disagreements like hush hush up until that moment, because it was a 3-story house, so who knows. I was on like the 2nd story, they were on like the lower level, so there was just more space. But now that we were in this tiny apartment, it's like they couldn't hide that from me. Maybe I don't know what words were said or what they were fighting about. I just heard noise and looked out, and literally right when I looked out, he kicked her so hard in her tummy and she went flying. I closed the door because I didn't want to be caught, and then I heard my mom crying really loud in the bathroom, and so I think he had left after he did that. So I went in the bathroom to console her and just sit there. It was the first time I saw her cry. I know that my mom, like, because he lost his job, my mom started working a lot to pay for everything, right? Because now she's the one paying for everything. So the first incident of him abusing me was him calling me into the bathroom. When I got in there, he was naked. I didn't understand, and he had jelly, and he put it on himself, and he told me to lick it off. And I don't want to. The smell was gross. It was sticky. After that, he then made me like use my hand, and he showed me what to do, and until like stuff came out and went in the toilet. And after that, I don't even know what I did because I go blank. That's all. I just remember that whole situation. And I know at one point he made a comment about don't tell anybody or else. And so I always, like, whenever I think of him telling me that, I just always see my mom being kicked across the room pregnant. So like, I believed him. He would switch what he would do. Like, he never penetrated fully my private area, but he would do things to my private area or make me do things to his private area. And I remember just leaving my body. I learned how to leave my body and kind of just be up in a corner in the room somewhere. And then when I would come back to my body, I hated how it felt because it would be burning down there. So I had a friend at school. She was my best friend, and she came home one day, and like, I thought that my friend being there was going to save me from him trying anything, and I was so wrong. Me and her were in my room playing, and then all of a sudden he's in the doorway to the closet. He was just standing there naked in the closet doorway to my room. And he came in there and he started directing us and telling us what to do and get undressed and directing us to play with my teddy bear and each other and him. I felt awful and so wrong and guilty that like my friend just got used too. Created an interesting trauma bond between me and her too. It went on until I was 8, until my mom left him. Like, because even when we moved out of that little tiny pink apartment in San Bruno and moved to San Mateo, and he actually started working, I thought that like it would end, but he found time and pockets to do things and different kind of things. Sometimes he'd use oil. Sometimes he'd be doing oral on me. He would make me be naked and wash my body and rub me all over, just like so many different things. And yeah, it didn't stop until my mom left. And I was actually really scared when my mom left because I was like, oh, did she find out? Like, I didn't want to get anybody hurt. I was really paranoid. But then the story continues, right? Because he wasn't out of the picture because my little sister is his daughter. And so there's a whole custody thing around that where we were still seeing him. Like, he would take us for visits to go do things. And then actually, this is when he started taking her to the bathroom instead of me. And she was 3. And that again just made me feel awful because I felt like I couldn't do anything. It was 3rd grade. My friend was holding my hand the whole way to my mom's car. She was picking me up from school. I couldn't tell her, but my friend had to. I just couldn't. And then we ended up going to my mom's friend's house. The cops were called, and I had a really hard time talking about it, like verbally saying the things would just make me feel so much stuff in my body. I wrote it all out like an essay, and that was the beginning, right? And I thought I was helping my sister, but oh my God, like the system took forever to protect her. She was able to go visit him by herself. for so long, even though they knew what he was doing. And so I felt like I should have just kept my mouth shut in a way, because now she was going to visit him by herself without me at all. This is actually in my book too. I talk about this because first therapist they had me go to was so traumatizing. I didn't even know this lady. She's some stranger. The first and only session I have with her, she's pulling out these dolls and telling me to show her what happened. And I'm like, that was so traumatizing, right? Like, who are you and what? And because of that experience of feeling forced to have to tell this stranger and interact the dolls, I didn't talk to anyone again after her. Like, I got another therapist who was actually nice, and I saw her for like a year. Not once did I ever talk about it because of how that first therapist was. And then also they made me go to a gynecologist, and that to me was actually just as traumatizing as Bobby, because Bobby didn't penetrate my private, but this gynecologist did. By this time, I just felt like my body wasn't mine. I got bullied a lot because I was like more quiet, but I do remember there was this girl who was always bullying me, and when all this was happening and coming to the surface, like I just couldn't take it, and I snapped one day and I pushed her into the fence, and she never bullied me again. So like, I guess that was good. It made me really feel uncomfortable in my body. I mean, on top of puberty, right? Like your body's changing, and then people talking about looks and this and that. So I feel like I struggled a lot with my body growing up, because like with Bobby, nothing ever felt good, and it was always like burning sensations. But because of what he was doing, I started touching myself and started having orgasms at 5, so I would make myself feel good. So even having that so young, it's just so much innocence was lost. Right. And also because of him doing that to me, I almost became a magnet. Like there was this boy that touched me during movie time at school, his brother at recess, there was this girl at latchkey. Like people, it just felt like I became a magnet of people touching me because I was groomed and didn't have a sense of agency to say no. This actually makes me think of like there was a Christmas, like we didn't want to let her go. We didn't. And we were all three just sitting at the front of this apartment building, like the door. We didn't want to open the door to let her go. And he's on the other side of the door, obviously. And he called the police because my mom wouldn't give her to him. And the police made my mom give her to him. That was so hard. Because we knew what he was doing, they still let her keep going by herself to go on visitations to wherever he took her. And some of the stories she's told me about where he took her and what he did, like that's her story to tell, but like I can't believe it, you know, it was bad. But what got them to finally like get more strict with him was actually he came and kidnapped her off of the playground after school. We were outside playing, it was after school, latchkey daycare, and he just came and kidnapped her right off of the thing. None of the teachers stopped him. I was scared, I didn't know what I could do, right? And he took her for weeks, a couple weeks. My mom couldn't get her back, and because he pulled that stunt, that's when they finally enforced visitation. Like he could only see her with a like supervisor there, so that's when it got restricted. But it took a long time. I remember like going to a lawyer and I didn't want to talk. It was like torture to talk. So we were working on a case, but the case never came to fruition. I never went to court to speak, and I'm not quite sure what caused him to stop seeing his daughter, because my mom was like an old friend of hers was coming around that she knew forever, and they started dating, and he was actually a really good guy. We ended up moving in with him, so he was like just super supportive through the whole process, and she ended up marrying him. But somehow Bobby just disappeared. But we heard years later, right, that he died of sepsis, so some weird disease where your internal organs liquefy. And I was like, that was the justice piece right there. We never got to bring him to justice in the court system, but like the universe and, you know, Mother Nature kind of gave him one for sure. I feel tortured still in some ways by the aftermath of the abuse, and I'm 41. Yeah, the aftermath. I can't watch sex scenes in movies. Like, it makes my entire body go through like the same sensations. So like the best I could do with it is boundary it, right? Like I can't be in a relationship with that. We have VidAngel to help block that stuff out. Thank goodness they have resources like that now. Back in the day they didn't. So it makes going to like pools difficult. It makes, going places where people aren't fully dressed challenging sometimes because my nervous system does things. The triggers just are really strong still, even at 41, even though I've done so much somatic work. I would just end up in relationships with men that would cheat or lie or abuse. I ended up in relationships too with people I probably shouldn't have been dating at all. Like I didn't really have that parental protection. Like nobody was telling me not to date these people. So in a way it's like statutory rape in ways, because it's just like they're like 20 and you're like 15 or 16 or whatever. Like you shouldn't be talking to this person. But yeah, there were a lot of really abusive relationships. With my first relationship, real boyfriend, I got with him when I was 16 and he was way older. He was already like 19, and I was with him for like 4 or 5 years, like all through high school and then after, and he cheated on me multiple times. The most abusive one, he was very physical. He broke my thumb. He would throw my homework down in the middle of the street when I was going to the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising in San Francisco. He would yell at me and cuss at me in public, calling me a and this and that, just for looking up, having my eyes up versus at the ground. And he was just constantly accusing me of things that I wasn't doing. There was one time he got in the middle of the intersection and sat there and wouldn't move, so the police were called. They put him in a straitjacket. They took him in. I got put in handcuffs because I was like scared. I was like, don't do that. But yeah, there were a lot of emotionally abusive people too. Like as I guess I went along the healing process, they got more emotionally abusive versus physically or violent abusive. When I was 23 years old, I was dating this really abusive guy. He started as a brother type person, and then those lines kind of started to blur. We were arguing in the car. He got out. I don't know why. I started chasing him. I followed him to the back of the gas station, and he called me a or something like that. And like he had done it so many times, like I couldn't just take it anymore. And this was actually the first time I slapped him because of how many times he had called me names, how many times he had just disrespected me, how many times. And I slapped him. And in that moment, he just took my hand, looked me in my eyes, and broke my thumb. And it's the only bone I've ever had broken in my whole life. When I was with him, like I was getting a lot of anxiety, because obviously he was cheating and lying and this and that, and my body would sense it before I would even know for sure. And so I thought that I needed to get help. And so there was like a Tony Robbins infomercial back then, and it kind of planted a seed. And then there was this other infomercial about like this anxiety program. I got the anxiety program, and then I started reading Tony Robbins. And then when I was in that really, really abusive relationship, so fast forward some years there, I ended up in this really amazing acting class. It was a Meisner acting class with Rachel Adler in San Francisco. It was because before that moment, before that class, I was living on autopilot, total survival mode, not in the present moment at all. And that whole process of Meisner is all about being authentic in the moment, fuck polite, say how you feel, feel what you feel, all this stuff. So it really like just brought me into my body and the present moment. And she actually called me out. She's like, if you don't get therapy, I can't work with you anymore because you have the most intense defense mechanism system I've ever seen in my life. Because she said like people would say something to me and I would take it and I would mold it and I would do all this stuff before I would send it back, versus just being authentic in the moment. And so hallelujah for her, because she really woke me up even more. And from that point on, it went to like other personal development type companies like PSI seminars. But like really the major piece of healing didn't happen until I had my daughter. Because when I had her, I was facing being a single mom and I had no plan. Having a daughter brought everything I thought I had potentially healed to the surface with a vengeance. So let me know any of the work I did before her didn't get to the roots. It was really overwhelming for my system. actually, because I was so scared and I felt like such an asshole for bringing a baby into the world, a world that I hadn't quite felt safe in. And I was like, how the heck am I supposed to protect this child, in this crazy world that I wasn't protected in? And it just really opened up a trauma capsule for me. I was so scared of repeating the same thing, getting in a relationship with a guy that would do to her. That was like my worst fear. And that made it really hard to trust anyone. So that made like babysitting, like who am I going to leave my child with? I felt like I had no one. And so I leaned on my mom. And even though that wasn't the most healthy, it was like, at least I know her, but it really created a pressure cooker. I didn't know where to turn. And so at that point, I kind of turned toward a higher power, not because of a boyfriend and not because of this or that, but just really surrendering to like a higher power. I was angry because if there was a God or a higher power, I'm like, well, why did you let this happen to me? Why did you let that happen to me? Why do you let this happen to kids? So like every time I took a step toward it, it would take a step toward me and guide me. And it kind of led me to somatic work. So clinical EFT tapping, brain spotting, and then somatic attachment therapy and parts work. And EFT was the first one that really, I started noticing shifts, like things shifting for me where like I didn't feel the same way towards it. Like I didn't have the same charge in my body like I did before. And that's when I knew, and it didn't come back. I was always scared, like, is it going to come back? Like, yeah, right. This isn't really like, I just had this like relationship, like nothing really actually helps. Right. But it did. And it stayed. And so then I became certified because I was so convicted. I'm like, well, if this actually helps me, because I've tried so many things, then like I have to share it. I have to help other people with it. Now I'm an author. Woo! My book is coming out in October and November. Into the Light, Becoming My Own Hero. I'm also a speaker, and I'm also a somatic transformational coach. And I walk people through my pain into power process, and it's very somatic. It helps release what's in your body and helps you build a healthy relationship with your body and your emotions and really transform your pain into your power. And I help you become your own hero, because that was actually a piece I had to learn. Nobody was coming to save me. I had to save myself. The first place to start to me is just making the choice that you deserve better, and then seeking help for sure. And if you're scared to actually reach out to a person, start with books. There's some really good books, and really taking care of yourself. So boundaries, filling your cup, doing things like meditation and movement, and learning EFT tapping, because these are things you can do on your own to just start regulating your nervous system, which to me is the most important piece. It kind of impacted me and my sister's relationship too, because like she looked like him. And so even though I loved my sister, sometimes I had a hard time because she looked like her dad, like in her face or like her toe. And so I think sometimes like the resentment would come out towards her, even though it wasn't towards her, because I was so young, I've always felt really sad about that. So like there's a lot of trauma there for sure, which I go into depth in my book, because like my mom, she went through so much, right? And she never got healing for any of it. She kind of just stuffs it places. So it has impact, and it caused her to make choices that impacted us that weren't the best. And so there's like layers and layers of trauma there as we grew up. I broke the chains. Yeah, I broke the chains with my daughter. I love my daughter so much. And I guess that also makes me mad at my mom, because I'm like, I couldn't make those choices that she made because I love my daughter too much. And I can't treat my daughter any of the ways my mom treated me, because I just love her too much. And it also confuses me. I'm like, how, why, because like I look at her and I'm like, she's my everything. But with her, I cherish her innocence. She's 11. It makes me so happy. I'm like, yes, broke that chain.